Welcome to Novabet, the ultimate destination for Euros football betting. All Novabet customers can get a free €5 bet daily, every day throughout the group stages of the Euros. Once they place a €10 bet builder, potentially earning up to €65 in free bets. And all new customers will get a minimum of €50 in free bet when they register with Novabet and stake 10. Don't forget to download the Novabet app for exclusive prices and promotions. Novabet, the home of football for the Euros. T's and C's apply. 18 plus. Bet responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
From dining on board to going off-grid, from chilling out to diving in. Discover a greater way to escape this summer with Brittany Ferries. Sailings from Rosslare to Bilbao. Hurry, book now for 30% off your sailing when you book a Brittany Ferries holiday. Excludes onboard accommodation. See website for details.
Gamarjova Patronebi, this is bonus episode 2. Bakur, the Iberian. We'll be talking about a lesser-known figure named Bakur, who likes to pop up randomly throughout Roman history, and today we'll be joined by a special guest and friend of mine, Marco from the Storia d'Italia podcast. Gamarjova, Marco, and welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourself and what it is you do?
Gamarjova, is it correct? So, Gamarjova, Roberto, it's really a pleasure to be on History of Saqartvelo. I hope I said it acceptably. I must say, I am in love with Georgia because I visited Georgia. I love Georgian culture, so it's really a pleasure. Besides, we know each other, but that's another story. Yeah, so I have a podcast in Italian, so if some of your listeners know Italian or learn Italian, they can go check it out. It's called Storia d'Italia, as you said, and it basically starts around the time of Constantine, where you are now, basically, and goes always forward. So more or less the same format in that sense. So I've been doing it for almost 4 years, and I got now to the Lombards, so in 7th century, let's say. So a few centuries ahead of you.
Yeah, well, with the way our sources work, it won't be long until we catch up.
Well, unfortunately, I'm slow, so it's likely that you will catch up.
Yeah, it doesn't help that when I right now, well, as of this recording, they'll probably see this in like July, but when I'm currently recording, I thought I was going to have 3 episodes on Marion. It's going to look like it's going to be 5. So, because he has a lot of sources, and we have Saint Nino, but yeah. I'm like, oh, we're actually getting sources. And I looked ahead to read a bit more, and I'm like, oh, wait, never mind. This is going to be really fast. So
don't get used to it.
I hope, no, I won't. I know once it gets to like the medieval ages, it's going to be a lot again. So, but thank you so much. So I'll give an introduction to Prince Bakur, and Marco's going to give us the Roman perspective and like things that are going on in history at the time, especially over the battles of Adrianople and the Battle of Frigidus, in which Prince Bakur participated in. So let's get started. And as I mentioned before in our opener, Bakur is a lesser-known figure throughout history, but he's heavily involved with the Romans at the end of the 4th century. It's actually through Bakur that we have any written information about the Christianization of Kartli. He was an acquaintance of the church historian Rufinus. They met during Bakur's travels in Jerusalem, and Bakur gave Rufinus the earliest known account of the conversion, which is then supplemented by quite a few Roman and Georgian sources in the historic and church traditions.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. I didn't even know that he was the source. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I didn't know about it. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and like, has Rufinus popped up in your research at all? Or like,
yeah, no, he has, but yeah, he's not as central as other authors. For example, at this time of period, for me, Ammianus Marcellinus was the main primary source, and then I usually go hunt for other details elsewhere. So,
yeah, because I couldn't find much on Rufinus, but Rufinus actually really liked Bakur, and he states how Bakur is a great source of information for him, And because of Bakur's status as a Saqartvelo royal and a general in the Roman army, or comes domesticorum,
Comes domesticorum, yes.
yeah. So Rufinus likes to bring attention to his status, and also how Bakur also likes to seek religion and truth at all times. And to Rufinus, Bakur's story of this conversion of Kartli only showcased how Christianity flowed from the Roman state to these barbarian lands on its borders. And the best part for Rufinus is that the person who enlightened Georgia was a woman named Saint Nino, and this highly appealed to his friend, the wealthy ascetic Melania. Not Melania Trump, sadly. No. And he also states that the Eastern Church is, it's known for giving women more of a chance of taking these important roles, and this would naturally pique Rufinus's interest. And I'm going to talk a bit about Rufinus here because he's basically our main source for any information about Bakur. And he mentions that Bakur is a very devout Christian, but the historian Libanius that Bakur corresponded with in 392 AD used terms that would make Bakur seem like he was actually a pagan. And this brings us to an impasse because we don't know who to trust. Do we trust the guy who's like, this Bakur is amazing, let's talk about everything, or Libanius who's like, nope, he's a pagan, can't really trust him, he's horrible. But from what I see from this is that this tells us like how Christianity and paganism were still like together at some point in the 4th century.
This in the 4th century, really, we are side by side, and we have the intelligentsia of the Roman Empire. That is, some of them are Christians, majority actually, but there's plenty still. Libanius is one of the most famous, but not the only one. So there's still several pagans. We have Symmachus in Rome, a very famous pagan in Rome. So they are coexisting, and it is probably the last time. This is the last period when they are coexisting, because basically with Theodosius from 378 to 395, there's this big transition towards making Christianity not just the main religion of the Roman Empire, but the official religion of the Roman Empire. And soon there will not be any space left for an independent pagan existence, at least overtly pagan. Plenty of secretly pagan, and paganism will remain in the 5th century, especially in the countryside, even longer than that. But in the intelligentsia, the people that mattered in the Roman Empire were only very few thousand people. That's it. And among those people will become basically untenable to remain Christians. To remain pagan, sorry.
Yeah, I totally get that. And it really doesn't help that Libanius' writing style tends to like address Christians and even Christian emperors as pagans too. So he just considers everyone a pagan.
Yeah, you could see that he will think like, oh no, maybe how I can reconstruct what's going on here. You will have people that will have overtly converted to Christianity, but still hold pagan way of thinking, or even actual pagan. And pagan, of course, is the Christian understanding of believing the ancient gods. So it's of course, when you say pagan, you're already seeing the world with the eyes of Christianity. But with the way of thinking of the people that believed in the old gods, that were not, in the eyes of the believer of the old gods, it was not incompatible. You could be at the same time believing any the pantheons, Sol Invictus, and think that Sol Invictus can also be the god of the Christians. So that's why also it's very hard for us to pick, to understand Constantine, because Constantine, you cannot really understand when is the point that he converts to Christianity. And he does convert to Christianity. That's pretty obvious. But when? because he's monotheistic before becoming a Christian. He believes in Apollo. He has a vision with Apollos, and he clearly favors Sol Invictus for many years. And we cannot reconstruct at which point that becomes the Christian God. And you may even think it's a continuum. It's not like a discrete thing. Before it's something and after it's something. It's more like a process where slowly, in his mind, over several decades, he becomes more and more Christian.
Yeah, and like with Sol Invictus, that started with Aurelian, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Sol Invictus was around for a long time. In reality, if you think about El Gabal is basically Sol Invictus. They are different representation of the same god. And El Gabal was the god of Heliogabalus, the one Roman emperor of the Severan dynasty, so earlier in the history of Rome, in the beginning of the 3rd century. So, and before then, El Gabal was basically this sun god of Emesa, very important city in Syria, from where this big important dynasty of kings, they were the kings of Emesa, and then they became, of course, as usually happens in history, when you get conquered, it's not like the local elite disappears. The local elite remains the local elite. So the kings of Emesa became some of the most powerful people in the Roman Empire. And eventually, one of the women of this family married in the imperial family. So that's how we get to a Gabal. But just to say that Sol Invictus, actually, history is longer. But yes, Aurelian took it as his answer to the question of finding a new religious footing of the Roman Empire. Because at the end of the day, in the 3rd century, early 4th century, everybody knew that something was changing. They will end up with Christianity was not for sure, I think. But the entire culture was moving towards monotheism. So at the end, they picked one of the available monotheisms, if you want, but the entire culture, even philosophy, was moving towards monotheism, because you have the Neoplatonism that conceptually moves towards the origin. There is something at the beginning of the world that is the non-moving origin, because everything in the world moves, but there's something that doesn't move, and the thing that doesn't move is God. And that's the origin of all the ideas and everything that exists in the world. So even philosophy, which is the most pagan thing, the Christians called the philosophers the Helleni, the people that believed in the Greeks, basically. We will say that. So even the philosophers were moving towards monotheism.
Yeah, and actually, I've mentioned this a few times in my podcast, but the word in Georgian for Greek, berzeni, actually means like the wise ones, because of that philosophy.
You see, that's I didn't know that. That's very interesting, and you can see how people there, they are looking towards Greece as the wise ones. That's very cool.
I mean, with the Greeks coming in and making their colonies there, and Jason and the Argonauts, and then
of course,
the Byzantines, if we were gonna Eastern Rome, or Nova Roma, as I like to call it sometimes, is essentially they see them as like this is the big mighty empire that always saves us from things, or causes trouble for us, and then we have to join them. But yeah, so the Greeks are just the berzeni, the wise ones, which I always found interesting when my Georgian teacher told me that.
Well, there are worse ways of being called. So
there are worse ways of being called, yeah. But we're here for Bakur though. So
I don't know. Let's go back. Let's
bring it back a bit. Yeah. So Bakur was part of the Roman military for several years, long before he met Rufinus in Jerusalem. The historian Ammianus mentions that an Iberian named Bakur fought in the Battle of Adrianople, and there he is an impetuous tribunus sagitorium in the Roman military. So what is a tribunus sagitorium?
Yeah, so and let's say one thing first, that these princelings coming from the borderlands of the Roman Empire often end up being commanders of the Roman armies. That's completely normal at our time of history, even before, but especially in the 4th century. So you have Prince of Iberia, Prince of of the Goths serving in the Roman army, and by the way, in all history, there's never a case where they end up being unfaithful to their employer, the Roman Empire, even when they fight their own people. If they are in the Roman army, then they are Roman officers at that time. Of course, they bring their own clienteles and things like that. So what is a tribunus? A tribunus is basically a tribune, is a commander of a regiment. Now, when we think of the Roman army in the late empire, that's a very different beast from the Roman army we are more familiar with usually, which is the Roman army of the High Empire or the late Republic. There are no more legions, traditional legions of 6,000 people. That was the standard legion of the High Empire. And now we have something that they're still called legions, but they're not legions, real legions anymore. They are more like regiments of about 1,000 people. And then you have regiments of horse archers, like in this case. So Sagittarius, Sagitta means arrow in Latin. So that's, there we go. Very simple. And there you have archers on horse, which is again something. It's a new innovation, let's say, of the late Roman Empire. They learned it from the people of the steppes, and they start using it much more. The late Roman army has been really misunderstood by the classical historians of the 19th century as a much weaker force. Now we know was actually pretty badass army, and it actually answered problems that required a change, because the old Roman army was completely defeated in the 3rd century, was not up to the task anymore. So the Romans, as they always did in their history, 2,000 years of history, then they changed it. Like they had done before, because before, for example, the Romans used the phalanx for a long time. That's something probably not many know. They used the phalanx like the Greeks, and then they changed it because it didn't work anymore. So anyway, so the role of Bakur, as I said, a prince becomes an officer. So typical that for a princeling to become an officer of the Roman army and have a command. In this case, he was probably fairly young at the time, so he was a tribune. He will rise up in rank as years go by. But at Adrianople, actually, he has a pretty important but infamous role, if you want.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of your listeners are familiar with the Battle of Adrianople and the background. So you tell me how much details, it's fair.
I have not covered it yet, and I don't plan on covering it. So go ahead.
Okay. So I'll say this is kind of the short version, and it's going to be still long. So what happens is the Huns happened. So the Huns arrived in around 370. They came out of Asia and entered in what today is Ukraine. In what today is Ukraine and Romania, you had two big kingdoms of Goths, the Greutungai in English, and Tervingi or Tervinghi in what is today Romania. The Huns completely defeated both. It was terrifying for the Goths, because the Goths were the biggest kid in the block in that area. No one messed with the Goths, and yet they both were heavily defeated. So what happened that both these people went to the Danube and asked asylum to the Roman Empire, because they could not leave anymore. Not everyone, by the way. Plenty of Goths remained north of the Danube, and they became the Ostrogoths, that one day would conquer Italy. And the Goths that instead migrated, and this is really reminiscent to me of Lord of the Rings, the Avari and the Eldars.
Yeah.
And And the Goths that migrated in the Roman Empire, they became the Visigoths, so the Western Goths. So over time, of course. So the Goths asked asylum, and at that time, Valens, the Roman emperor at the time, he had a big problem. He was about to start a war with the Persians, as the Romans often do, and he was in Antioch, very far away from the Danube, and he really didn't want to go back to the Danube. So he said, okay, let them in, but be careful. Just let one group, not the other, and, organize everything so they get, provisions, they get food. We need to resettle them. Now, the Roman Empire did this all the time, because often what happened in what they call the Barbaricum, the land of the barbarians, somebody will lose out. And when anybody lost in the Barbaricum, what they did is they went knocking on the door of the Romans and says, "Would you let us in?" The Romans said, "Sure, you can come in, but we break you up. You go here, you go there, you go, we'll break you up. You will have to serve in the army, and you will be not given land, as an owner, but you will need to rent the land." So it wasn't very favorable. Okay, the Goths were really mistreated by the Romans for several reasons. I mean, I don't go into the details, but Ammianus Marcellinus gives a fantastic account, and we also have Eunapius, a Greek author, that confirms Marcellinus. So that's good when we have two that say more or less the same story and they're far apart. So pretty much confirms that the Goths were really mistreated. And I like that the Romans didn't say, the barbarians, bar, they just barbarians, but they said very openly, the Romans mistreated them.
So I remember reading that the Romans, like, it basically gave them rotten food and sold them provisions at very high costs, and the Goths essentially had to, like, sell their children to even get any food at all.
Yeah, it's this is the kind of things that happen in a pre-modern government.
Mm-hmm.
Bureaucracy, we think that the Roman Empire must work so diligently, but at the end of the day, it's very few people, and there's always someone that wants to profit out of it. Also today, by the way, imagine today, with all the technology we have, we still have corrupt bureaucrats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine in a pre-modern world without computers, without check, without, where you send a letter to the emperor, it takes 3 weeks. So, of course, the Roman emperor, he was in Antioch. He could not control what was going on. What was going on? Probably some local, the local leaders, basically the come strace, which was the military commander of the district, wanted to get rich out of this. So selling, he controlled the food. So he's like, why give it for free? I can sell it, and make money. So anyway, and there's a whole list of reasons. And at the end, at a certain point, this Lupicinus, he invites the Goths for dinner, and then he pulls out a red wedding, and he tries to kill them. Which was, by the way, something the Romans did sometimes. When they feared there would be a rebellion, they will invite the potential head of the rebellion, kill them all. So if there is a rebellion, at least it's headless.
That reminds me of Constantius II.
Oh yeah. What a lovely family that is.
Oh, what family?
Which family? There's no more family.
There's no more family. I'm Constantius II. What family? Oh, cousin.
What yeah, there's only just a couple of small cousins, but I'm sure there will not be trouble. Anyway, one ends up being trouble at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say, so what happens is there is a rebellion, and it's a very complicated history. But basically, the Romans get some defeat. They cannot quite get on top of things all the time. They always answer with not enough men, until finally Valens realizes, okay, we're gonna need a bigger boat. If you remember Jaws. So he said, okay, I get it. I'll make peace with the Persians, and I'll go personally with all my army. And so he goes with all his army, and he even organizes a coordinated attack with the Western Roman Empire, with Gratian, the Roman Emperor Gratianus, the Roman Emperor at the time, in the West. And they organize their by uncle and nephew. And they organize to converge on the Balkan Peninsula, where they will destroy the Goths. And between them, they have plenty of people to do the job. And the funny thing is that Gratian gets really close to Adrianople. He was, maybe a few days worth of march away from it. But Valens, he's in Adrianople, and he has to spend months and months waiting for the nephew, the little nephew. Imagine he's the uncle, he's the senior.
Mm-hmm.
And the people start nagging him. You really need your little nephew to save your day, why share the glory when you can have the glory all for yourself, no? And the scouts, one of the things the Romans were really bad at is scouting. So the scouts told him, it's 10,000 gods tops, so you'll be fine. He probably brought 25 30,000 people as soldiers, and not only good number, these are the best soldiers the Eastern Roman Empire has by far. Their most seasoned, because at this time of the late Roman army has different ranks of quality of so they're not all legions all the same. You have the basically the limitanei are the troops for defending forts and cities. Then you have comitatenses, which are the field armies, and then you have the palatine, from Pallas, the palatine troops. And he has brought the palatine troops and the best comitatenses. So this is the best of the best. And they say, okay, there's the scout says 10,000. Let's go meet them in battle. So what happens is that then, and this is very interesting, the leader of the Goths, Fritigern, sends envoys saying, we came here, we were granted a treaty, we want to go back to the treaty, let's forget all these 2 years of war. Can't we be friends again? And that's of course is taken as a sign of weakness. And then Fritigern, even at least Ammianus Marcellinus tells us that Fritigern sent. So you can't trust 100% ancient sources, but he says that, and this sounds realistic, that he sent a secret letter to the emperor saying, the council of the head of the gods, they don't want to come to terms that are too unfavorable. But if you put your army in front of them and they see the entire army, the entire freaking Roman army you brought, I'm pretty sure they'll be willing to negotiate. And I will sustain the negotiating position as long as I have guarantee from you that I will get a Roman command. Which, again, was a completely normal thing of a god, even a defeated god. You defeat a god, then, okay, let's make him a Roman commander. It's completely something in the realm of possibilities. So we are 1 day from the battle, and these guys are talking. And by the way, this is another interesting thing. Who is the ambassador of the gods? Is a Christian priest. Because the gods had already started to convert to Christianity. We have a very famous god called Ulfilas. He's the little wolf, right, in God. And he is actually the first known translation of the Bible that is not in Greek or Latin. So this is was translated into God. And we know this. Okay, now I'm going a little bit on a
No, keep going. I'm interested.
So we know this thanks to an incredible book, which today is in Uppsala in Sweden. This book was made in the 6th century in Ostrogoth, Italy. So Theodoric the Great is the king of Italy. And Theodoric the Great is basically the closest thing to a Roman emperor a Goth became. It was really, really close to being a Roman emperor. And he made this book all in the purple, imperial purple, in vellum, which was the most expensive material, all written in silver and gold letters. So the value of this thing, even at the time just made, was incredible. But the value of it is that the only piece of literature in Goth with the Gothic alphabet. So there's a special alphabet that was developed just to translate Gothic. And this is the first Germanic piece of literature ever.
Oh my gosh, that is so
A-
cool.
And so this is incredible. And the incredible thing is that Ulfilas was an Arian. I mean, he was perceived as Arian. So Arianism, of course, is the doctrine that was defeated at Nicaea. Probably if you asked Ulfilas, he wouldn't say I'm Arian, but anyway, that's too complicated. So anyway, so the gods, yeah, it's too complicated. Get to Musian and
I'm not covering that. We don't need to cover it in my region, so we're good.
No, that's no one needs that. So so back to Adrianople. The Valens refuses to negotiate. So he says, no, we're gonna fight them. So the next day they arrive after a long march in the scorching sun of August. If you have been in the Balkans in August, I tell you, it's really hot. And they arrive in front of the gods. And the gods, they have this, it's called a lager. It's not the lager, the infamous lager, but it's basically they put their carriage in to form an encampment. A bit like the pioneers in the American West, but a lot bigger. This is a place to put 10,000 people in. And they lock in this carriage to form really like a barrier. And they are on top of a hill. And so, strong position again. But the Romans think, we are 30,000, they're 10,000. But then they start having doubts. Are they really 10,000? Maybe there are a few more. And then there's another embassy of the gods saying, are you sure? Can't we have an agreement? At that point, Valens, and this is the day of the battle, Valens says, maybe we should. But at this point, I want to negotiate directly with Fritiger. But Fritiger doesn't want to go there without guarantees. So he asks, I want some hostage to be in our encampment, high-ranking Roman officer. And the guy that goes, by the way, they have a discussion, the Romans, and they say, I don't want to go. I don't, they say, why don't you go? He says, why can't he go? So anyway, so at the end, a guy says, and he's like, oh, I am strong. This is a Ricomeres. Again, a Frank. He's a Frank. Ricomer, yeah.
Like the general from the... No, couldn't be. He'd be dead by then. Wrong person, sorry.
No, it's not Ricomer that become then one of the de facto Roman emperors in the 5th century. This is the same kind of name. He's a prince of the Franks that has become a Roman general, like it happens all the time. So he was serving in the West, and then he was sent by the Western Roman emperor to help Valens. Basically, he's kind of the negotiation. How they call it? The military attaché.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. There you go. So, and he says, Ricomer says, okay, I'll go. And so they're arranging this. Sorry if I said all this, but because we get to the point of Bakur and why it's so important. So, but then what happens is that, you have two armies, one in front of each other, and they're still maneuvering to get into position for battle. And the left flank of the Romans has not really fully deployed yet. The center is deployed, the right wing is deployed, but the left has not fully deployed yet. They are negotiating for doing this agreement. So the soldiers probably think there's not going to be a battle today because it's already late in the day. These guys have been walking 17 kilometers from the encampment to this place. So it's late. We're in the afternoon. So it's not going to be a battle today. And then what happens, and this is very difficult to entangle what happened, but usually when you have tens of thousands of people with weapons in front of each other, in the movies, you always have somebody that is holding an arc, and then, like the Battle of Helm's Deep, and then shoots the arrow, and then all the orcs. Probably something like that happened. either the gods did something or Bakur did something, but what we know is that Bakur attacked. And he attacked before the battle was, without any authorization to start the battle. And again, sometimes there are these little skirmish, and they're just skirmish. But for some reason, probably the people just wanted to fight. They've been waiting to fight for so long. So the Roman army just said, fuck it, let's go. And so they started the battle like that because of Bakur. They started because of the unit of Bakur, but either he started it or he didn't put it under control.
So what you're saying is it is Bakur the Iberian's fault that the Battle of Adrianople happened. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I could not find that at all in my research. That is amazing.
Isn't it? And this is the battle that usually is credited for killing the Roman Empire. Now, it's not true that it killed the Roman Empire, but it is a pretty big deal, this battle.
I'm just going to say, hot take. Georgia killed the Roman Empire. I'm going to put that as my tagline now.
Yeah. Georgia killed the Roman Empire. We can say it. At this point, if A is B and B is C, then A is C, right? So
exactly.
Logic.
So I'm going to put that on Twitter pretty soon. It's like, yep, Georgia had an interview with Marco from Storia, Italia. If too long didn't read, Georgia killed the Roman Empire.
and everybody will be like, what? How? Because if you know the story, how this ends, the army charged uphill against the gods, and they were about to break in. So, because these are the best Roman soldiers, and they reached the encampment, the gods were almost with the back on the wall. But what happens at that exact moment, and who knows, maybe Fritigern was trying to buy time with the negotiations to reach this point, or maybe not, we will never know. But at this exact moment, 10,000 gods, or whereabouts, the entire cavalry of the gods explodes in the left, where the Romans had not completely formed yet, because the battle started without preparation. And what happened was that the cavalry of the gods achieved complete surprise on the left flank, destroyed the cavalry that was defending the infantry. So then what they do, they swing around and they attack from the back the infantry. Then what you have is the typical worst possible position an army can find itself, attacked on three fronts and without possibility to move. What Ammianus says is that the infantry kept getting in a closer and closer space, so they could not maneuver anymore. So your number don't count anymore.
So is it like the thing in Game of Thrones when
Exactly.
They're completely encircled and
they cannot move, they cannot breathe, they cannot move. So it doesn't matter how many you are. You can even be more than your opposing number, but if just one line behind you, no one can intervene in the battle, that person doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. So this is the situation that it gets to that point, and the infantry cannot disengage. Normally, the Romans were able to disengage if things got really bad. They could disengage, save at least the army or most of it, even if you have a defeat. In this case, it's complete annihilation. So the entire army, at least 2/3 of the army, and normally these battles, it was very rare that 1/3, was a terrible defeat to get 1/3 of your army destroyed. And here you have at least 2/3 completely wiped out, to the point that those units will never be reformed. So we know that those units, they died at Adrianople and they're not remade because they die all the officers. If you have a few officers survive, you can rebuild that unit because the officers have the knowledge of how to fight. But no one survives here. So except the few that could disengage.
And Bakur survives.
Bakur is one of the lucky ones. And he started it, and he's one of the lucky ones that survive. I mean, the chances are not very good, but Bakur was mounted. So, also several mounted units do not survive, but the mounted units on the right especially probably have the best chances of disengaging because they're far away from the left, because Bakur was on the right. Sorry, I didn't mention that. He started all that on the right. So, so that's why he probably survived. And one that didn't survive was the emperor that died there.
It's just a Roman emperor. He's not important.
Yeah, who cares?
He's not Valentinian,
Yeah, exactly.
But it's funny because in my head, when you're saying, with Bakur, this whole thing happening to the Romans and Bakur surviving, it just reminds me of the classic, like, Georgian tactic of running into the mountains and hiding.
So he probably knew how to do that.
And you said they're fighting in the Balkans, and so basically and they're going uphill. So I'm like, so Bakur, the Iberian, just did what his people do best, and they see a battle they can't win, so they just ride into the mountains and just hide until the enemies go away.
Goodbye. But
goodbye, Romans.
To be fair, all the units there that could escape, they ran, because that's the normal and logical thing to do. In that case, you have to run. It's just stupid. You're going just to make the defeat worse if you stay. So at the end, I don't blame in that sense. He did what he had to do. Plenty of other Roman generals survived, but we know of at least 30 generals that died there. So there's that, like, imagine an entire officer corps that dies there. So it's a big deal.
Wow, that is wow. I'm still thinking Georgia killed the Roman Empire.
Exactly, it's Bakur. It's all Georgia's fault.
Yeah. I mean, you're married to an Armenian, so of course you're going to say that.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, but it's funny because Bakur ran away. He started the battle. He ran away, and then he gets promoted.
I guess when most of your competitor, let's say, die, that helps your career prospect, I guess.
Yeah. So Bakur literally becomes, he becomes Dux Palestinae, and the Duke of Palestine, basically, and then he becomes Scopes Domesticorum from like 378 to 394. But some historians think that this might not be the same Bakur.
Okay.
Because Bakur is a very popular name among the Saqartvelo elite. So they're saying it couldn't be the same person, but if they're going for a royal prince, then I'm guessing it has to be the same person, because if you're saying, all these princelings become generals, it's just one after the other. But this is just a thing where it might not be him because it's so popular, but it probably is him.
It probably is, because it's such a typical career we're talking about, that it looks like a typical career of a Roman officer going forward. And having the confirmation of Rufinus that talks about him in the intervening years, so we know he was around. So I would say certainty not, but I will say it's probable that he's the same person.
Yeah, I'm also going to say he's probably not like an inheriting son, because right now with King Mirian, he has a son named Rev, and then he also has another son named Varaz Bakur, or Apascuris, which is, I just use the Georgian names because it's so much easier.
No, of course. Go ahead.
So like Varaz Bakur is the second son, but he went to Constantinople with Constantine. So he was raised as a hostage in Constantinople, and then was sent back by. Yeah, but once Constantine converted, he sent him back.
Yeah, but that's too early. That's too early, because
this Bakur,
this Bakur, he was probably a fairly young lad at Adrianople, a tribunus in his 20s or early 30s, I would say, for a tribunus. So that means that he was probably, by my calculation, born 340 to 350. Even later than that. So,
which would make sense for King Mirian, because Mirian dies in 361.
So it could be like
he has two sons, so it could be one of the sons of his sons. basically.
Yeah, like a nephew,
Like a nephew, yeah.
but not in the main line, because that's what happens with this cadet. You have the you have the main heir. That happens also today. You have the main heir, and then you have the younger brother. What do you do with him? Send him to have a career in the Roman Empire, so he'll make himself a big name. These positions are really nice. You get a big salary for being an officer in the Roman army, to the point that some kings of small kingdoms, they prefer to be an officer in the Roman army sometimes. Some heirs to kingdoms says, king or magister militum. Magister militum is nice. So
yeah, especially with how much the Romans keep upping the pay with every new emperor.
yeah, no, they give you extra bonus. It's not just the pay. They give you extra bonus every 5 years. They pay you more. If there is a campaign, it's extra money. And then,
if you have 5 emperors in 1 year, it's a lot of money.
And the Magister Militum, he gets like 20 secretaries and a whole staff. Big house, property. It's a good gig.
It's a good gig. I would like that.
If you can get there, of course, because the competition is strong. There's only 5 Magister Militum in the Eastern Roman army. And so, but there's, I don't remember the exact number, but about 15 comes. Comes is basically the count. So count comes from comes. I don't know if you already explained that. And as you said, and as you said, the dukes becomes duke. So dukes, basically, this may be another interesting thing, tidbit. So how was the Roman army organized at this time? Not before. This is not the organization of the High Empire. So you had a complete separation of civil and military, which you didn't have in the High Empire. So the governor was also the commander of the army in his region. Now you have careers for civilians, bureaucrats, and a career for military. And the military typically have these 3 big ranks. The dukes typically commands the troops of a border province like Palestina or Arabia or Syria. And he will have some troops, but mostly of the lower ranking, so the limitanei, so the one of the border kind of troops. A comes usually has several dukes under him, and he commands the field army of that region. So you have a comes Egypti, you have a comes Thrace, in Trachea, depends on the pronunciation here in Latin. And then you have a Magister Militum. The Magister Militum in the East under Theodosius, because he did a small reform, but this will remain the same also under Justinian. So what I'm saying now, imagine it all the way to the 6th century. So you have 5 Magister Militum, 2 Magister Militum Presentalis, so at the presence of the emperor. So they're basically in his general staff. And there are 2 because you cannot have just one, because one may become more powerful than the emperor. So you can use one against the other, That's a general rule. That's why many countries have 2 police. Why having 2 police when you can have one? It's better not to have just one police and one head of the police. So there are 2 Magister Militum Presentalis, and then you have a Magister Militum of Illyricum, so the Western Balkans, Magister Militum of Thracia, so the Eastern Balkans, and then you have a Magister Militum per Orientem, so in the East, which is what you will deal mostly, the Magister Militum of the all Eastern border. Then Justinian will make a reform and will create the Magister Militum per Armeniam, which of course is in the Armenian.
Welcome to Novabet, the ultimate destination for Euros football betting. All Novabet customers can get a free €5 bet daily, every day throughout the group stages of the Euros. Once they place a €10 bet builder, potentially earning up to €65 in free bets. And all new customers will get a minimum of €50 in free bet when they register with Novabet and stake 10. Don't forget to download the Novabet app for exclusive prices and promotions. Novabet, the home of football for the Euros. T's and C's apply. 18 plus. Bet responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
From dining on board to going off-grid. From chilling out to diving in. Discover a greater way to escape this summer with Brittany Ferries. Sailings from Rosslare to Bilbao. Hurry, book now for 30% off your sailing when you book a Brittany Ferries holiday. Excludes onboard accommodation. See website for details.
And region.
Which we might run into a little bit in my podcast.
You may. I think you will.
I think if it involves Armenia, it'll probably involve Georgia. Not a big
it does, because of course it's per Armenian, because they mean the mountains. It's the Magister Militum of those people there in the mountains. Everybody
those crazy mountain people.
Exactly.
So it's kind of funny because you said the Gomez basically turns into count and the Dukes becomes a duke, but in our how we see it, the count is below a duke usually, and here it's reversed.
Yeah, it's during the Middle Ages, all these titles were still used, and they were still around. But then, of course, centuries happens and things change. All the time. And Magister Militum disappears as a rank. We don't have a equivalent rank in noble rank. So things happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that not much is known about Bakur, because in 394 AD, Zosimus says that the prince was part of the Battle of Frigidus, in which he lost his life. So, what exactly happened in the Battle of Frigidus?
That's again, will require a little bit of time to explain. So after Adrianople, complete destroy of the Eastern Comitatus, so the field army. And what happens is that the Western Roman Emperor appoints a new Eastern Roman Emperor outside of his family, Theodosius. Some call him Theodosius the Great. I call him Theodosius the Maybe Great.
He's okay.
He's okay. Exactly. So Theodosius, in a way, Theodosius and Gratian together, over time, slowly, they manage to bring the Goths under control, simplifying things. But most of the Goths are enrolled in the Roman army. Fast forward a few years, and in 383, Gratian dies because basically a usurper, a friend of Theodosius. So that's very suspicious to me. He rebels in Britain, and he comes to Gaul, basically kills Gratian, and becomes unofficially for Theodosius the Western Roman Emperor. Then Theodosius defeats him in a big campaign in 388, and after this, I'm fast forwarding to get to Frigidus. He appoints. Basically, Gratian, the Western Roman Emperor, had a little brother called Valentinian II, and he never ruled anything because he was always too young. Was always somebody bossing him around. And Theodosius, not to change anything, decides to have somebody else to boss him around. So to make him just a figurehead. And the guy to boss him around is Arbogastes or Arbogaste. I know him as Arbogast in Italian, Arbogastes in Latin. And he is a Frank-Roman general. And we don't know what happens, but for real, we know that Valentinian II, that he was in the 20s now, he tried to assert himself to the point that he fired Arbogastes and said, you're just a Magister Militum. I'll fire you. I'm the emperor. And basically, we have in the story that Arbogastes did exactly the typical scene where he goes and rips the piece of paper in front of Valentinian II. You're telling me what? And so I take order only from Theodosius. And he did not send me away. So, just go back to bed. After this, Valentinian II is found dead. Now, was he killed by Arbogastes, or did his commit suicide, or was he killed by somebody else? Who knows? Most people usually assume it was Arbogastes, but actually, I personally don't think so, for the fact that it actually was a big headache for him. He would have probably liked to continue as it was. It was perfectly fine with him. Because now not having a Western Roman emperor was a big deal, was a big problem. He could have sent to Theodosius to ask to appoint a new one, but it looked very suspicious. So he decided to do a preventive rebellion, and he agreed with the Senate of Rome to appoint a new Western Roman emperor, a non-entity called Eugenius, and he's a non-entity. It doesn't matter. But what matters is the religious policy. The religious policy that they decide, and this is you must understand that even at this late hour in the Roman Senate, there's still plenty of pagans. Probably a majority of the Senate is still pagan, and they want the recent decision that Theodosius just passed a few years, like 2 years earlier, saying, all temples are closed, everything is banned, you cannot do anything anymore, pagan religion, you cannot do anything. They want this to be annulled, and it gets annulled, even though Eugenius is a Christian. So we even have some letters between Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, talking about this topic with, talking with friends and talking to the emperor. So we know this happened. We're sure about this, that there was a more pro-pagan policy. It was not like Julian the Apostate, go back to the old time, because at this point it was impossible, but was at least trying to have a coexistence between the ancient religion and Christianity. Let's say this, for Theodosius, of course, all this is unacceptable, and now he can even claim that this is a holy war to defeat the pagans, although, as we said, Eugenius was not a pagan. So Theodosius assembles a huge army in the east, most of them gods, not most of them, but a big amount of them are gods. And in the sources, what we know is that the gods served both as okay, this is very complicated and no one has a definitive answer, but probably the gods served both as regulars in the regular army. So you have to understand this is a big difference. You are a Roman soldier or you are a federati. Federati are basically allies, and these are not regulars. They are just called in for this specific campaign. They're paid, and then will go back home, and they will not be Roman soldiers when this is done. And these federati, though, they don't serve under their own leaders because that would be dangerous. So the Romans appoint 3 Roman generals to lead them, and these 3 are Gaines, that is a Goth. He will be, but he's a Goth serving as an official, as an officer in the Roman army. So, and he will have actually quite an interesting career after this.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Saul. He's an Alan, but again, official Roman officer. He will die in another battle against the Goths a few years from now. And then you have Bakur there, the third one. And Bakur probably was the most important of the 3 at the time. So and now this battle is very complicated and freaky in so many ways. This is, in my view, and many historians today, even more important than Adrianople, because here is where really the Western Roman army had not suffered that much to this point. The Western Roman army usually traditionally was considered the best of the two, and the Western Roman Empire was poorer, but the soldiers were stronger, and they did not suffer at Adrianople. Obviously, that was only the Eastern Roman army. At this battle, this would be a massacre. And this is a civil war. So what happens is that Theodosius, it's a 2 days battle. So it's very rare in antiquity that you have a 2-day battle. Theodosius, if you know a bit geography, you have the Balkans, you have a big, important Roman road that went through all the Balkans. By the way, the highway today that crosses the Balkans goes the same way. So it's always the same. The geography is that. Then you go to basically what today is Ljubljana, in the capital of Slovenia. And from there, you have several valleys that have a very easy entrance to Italy. Is the easiest way to get into Italy, crossing the Alps. All the other crossing in the Alps are pretty difficult, but this one is pretty easy, pretty low. So Arbogastes decides not to defend the passes, in basically almost luring in Theodosius. Theodosius comes out of the with the army out of the pass when it starts opening into a larger valley, and then beyond there is the plains of Italy. Okay, and when the army starts getting out, they suddenly realize that it's a trap, because on both sides on the hills there are units of the of Arbogastes, and to close the valley, the exit of the valley, there is a unit of Arbogastes. And the problem for the Theodosian army is that they cannot deploy in fully deploy, because it's too narrow. So only the the units in front, because they are still in a line, it's a column. This is the worst you can be as an army, to be in a column and being attacked. That's how the Romans were destroyed at Teutoburg. So this looks like will end up really badly, no? So Theodosius does the only thing that he can do. He basically tells the vanguard, just charge, try to break it. If we can break the block in front, at least we can get out, and then we will figure it out what to do. So who is in front in the vanguard? The Goths of Gaines, Saul, and Bakur. So they are in the vanguard, and they get this order, and they are really the only ones that can do it. And to their credit, they do it. These are not regular Roman soldiers, but they just go. They say, okay, let's just attack. And basically, the first day is mostly just the vanguard trying to break out. And the thing is, they do not. So they have horrible losses. Our sources, the sources always exaggerate the numbers. They say 10,000 dead Goths, only Goths. Could be lower than that, but definitely was a big deal for the Goths, because after this battle, they rebelled, saying, we are not going to do this anymore. You're just trying to kill us, for your wars, so that we are not a trouble anymore. And that's, by the way, what the Romans said. Orosius he's a Roman writer. He says, Theodosius that first day won in reality the battle, because he destroyed piece of the gods that were our enemy. And this is, of course, is BS. Theodosius that night, after this trial of breaking out, was in real trouble. And in fact, there's the story that he just went to pray, just say, praying God. This is a probably typical Christian historians that write this, because they're praying God and want God to intervene. And the thing that we should say, that Bakur, as you said, like Zosimus says, that he died at this first day of the battle. He was one of the three that died. Of the three commanders, is the only one that dies. So he survived Adrianople, but at least according to Zosimus, did not survive Frigids. Do you want to know how it ends on the second day? Or
I mean, we can talk about the second days, because I don't like cliffhangers. So tell me about the second day.
So the second day, I'll make a story short, but basically Arbogastes, his main fear that night was that Theodosius will escape. So this is a perfect trap. So we cannot allow him to escape. So he sends basically one of his commanders with a strong unit. He sends, cut his rear, so we will have it completely trapped. This guy figures out, I'm in a pretty strong negotiating position right now. So he goes to Theodosius and says, you know what? We could join you. with the right price. So,
Oh no.
and so they do. But even this is not enough to completely tip the balance, because the first day was a disaster for Theodosia. But Theodosia says, okay, let's try it again. Let's try to break out of the valley. So, not great strategy, just attack straight ahead, with maybe a bit more preparation this time, but still, it's the same strategy. But then something really freaky happened, according to the Christian authors. Zosimus doesn't mention it because he's pagan, and so he doesn't believe in this kind of stuff. But according to the Christian authors, and it is something that is, as I will explain, it is possible, an incredibly strong wind started blowing in favor of the Theodosian army and against the force of Arbogast. So strong that when they shot arrows, they would come back to them. Then there would be big dust that would cover completely them. And when you're a soldier, if something like that happens, usually the first thing you think is, okay, some god or some gods, they really don't want this to happen. Let's get the hell out of here, because we are here. Somebody higher up is not happy. So, is this possible? It is theoretically possible, because in this specific point in Slovenia and northeastern Italy, there's a wind called Bora, and the Bora is an extremely strong wind, which is basically caused by cold air forming up in the mountains and then rushing down the valleys. But they, on some days, they can achieve like Hurricane 2, Hurricane 3 strength. So we're talking about a strong wind, very strong.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
For a normal wind, it's I imagine that even today, if you go to Trieste, in northeastern Italy, you'll see like hooks on the streets, because that's where people will hold when the wind suddenly, because sometimes it happens very suddenly. So it suddenly starts blowing, and then you have to hold on in order not to fly away. So it's a strong wind. So it could have happened. And imagine how important this is for Christians. The Christian emperor that defeats the pagan. They weren't really pagans, but let's not get lost in the details. Defeats the pagan with a natural wind sent by God. It's like the quintessential manifest destiny of Christianity to win over paganism. So that's how Theodosius ends up winning the battle, and Arbogastes kills himself, and Eugenius is beheaded, and that's the end of it.
Oh my gosh. So like that actually reminds me of, you're talking about like those high winds from the mountains. Like a few episodes ago, I can't remember which one it was, but I mentioned that there's this really strong wind that goes through the Caucasus as well.
Yeah.
And mainly it's like when you're trying to get to Derbent, which is in Russia now. But there's this mountain pass where like what I mentioned was this, essentially people wanted to use the Dario Gorge in Georgia, because if they went through Derbent, or they went around, or if they went around the Caucasus, it would take a long time to get around the Caucasus along the Black Sea heading to Crimea. Or if they went to Derbent, there was times of the years where the winds were just so strong you couldn't get through.
Inside the Daryl Pass, I went to the Daryl Pass.
I know, I remember.
It's such an experience, because I was going there, and of course I went there because I read about it. So, and I was going through it, and I was thinking, this is so cool, and to look at it from a military point of view, like this deep valley that goes up and up and up, and then it's fairly easy pass, and then down into a very easy valley all the way to Russia. And I can totally see you. And it's the only, because you see, the Alps, you have lots of passes. But the Caucasus that's really, as you are mentioning, there's only 3 places you can cross it, and 2 are not really convenient. There's only one that is convenient, and that's it. And that's the Daryl.
So like that super high wind, armies couldn't get through, and that was like one of the reasons like why Georgia was so very well defensible from the north. Now, I'm not going to get into modern history because of that, because Soviet
Yeah.
Union and the Georgia and the Russians happened. But for most of the time, most of the invasions come from the south. Basically, you either have to come through the sea or from the south,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
is and like the north only happens in more modern history, unless you're the Mongols, then that's a different story too.
Yeah. But the Mongols, no one can stop
No
the
one can stop the Mongols. So it's like, just to bring it back to Georgia, it was just like that. I can see how that mountain pass affects things. It's like you were talking about it, and I was like, this is literally what happens in Georgia.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, it's Azerbaijan and Russia now, but this is literally what happened in that area. And it was like, yeah, that is something people can see as like divine favors. Like, oh, the wind's in my favor. And it's
So
just because because they could have been the complete opposite way too.
exactly, but history sometimes is defined by these little things. I mean, no one can know for sure that this really happened. I will stress it again. Sometimes Christian authors just fill in the blanks, and just to show that it really is God that is deciding history. So who knows? But it is realistic.
It is realistic, which is one of those things. It's like, oh wow, this could have happened, and just to bring it back to Bakur. So you mentioned he died in the first day, but some historians mention that he may have returned to Kartli to rule after his stint with the Roman military. But from the list that I'm using, this probably isn't true, because the first Bakur we see is like either way too early or way too late.
Yeah.
And like, it's weird because you have the Armenian historian Moses of Khorenatsi. He mentions there is a King Bakur in 415, but there isn't. So this is not very likely. So it's like, you might be able to see like, oh, he survived the battle, but like, if we're going based off of what Moses of Khorenatsi says, it's very likely that he died there. But the interesting thing is that some sources mention that Rufinus probably got his account of the Christianization of Georgia in 403 AD.
That will make it impossible, because the Battle of Frigidus is 394. So
394, yeah.
So,
which is a whole decade after Bakur supposedly died.
Yeah, or maybe it's not the same Bakur again, or he survived. Unfortunately, yeah, lost
You
to
can't
history.
tell.
Lost to history. It's very
Lost to
sad when
history,
that happens.
yeah. Because like, we don't know. Did Bakur die? Did he survive? Because we have Zosimus saying one thing. We have, Rufinus saying this has happened in 403. But one thing I am guessing may have happened is he may have picked it up from Bakur. This is my complete opinion. This is what I think happened. He may have told Bakur. Bakur may have told him about it before he died, when he was, the Comes Domesticorum, or he was a dux.
Mhm.
And because how writing used to work, it took forever to get anything written.
Yeah.
And so like, it may have
That could
taken,
be.
Rufinus 9 years to write the whole story.
Yeah, it could be. That could be. It's potentially possible.
So my whole thing is, it may have happened earlier, and then Rufinus just took 9 years to write it. But I read it, and it's only like 20 pages. So but like, they're also writing in like Greek, Latin, so it may have taken longer, and he may have been trying to like make
or
sure.
he took notes then, and then put it aside, and then picked it up later. Who knows? It's also that is possible. So, but unfortunately, it's interesting that in this period of history we do have so many details, because there are some period of Roman history, or this time history, where we have fewer details, but yet things like that can fall through the cracks.
Yeah, it's crazy, but I just want to know so like, after all the research and everything you did, because like, I have a thought about Bakur. What do you think about him?
Yeah, no, it's in a way, as I was trying to say today, his story is at the same time remarkable, because being in two of the most important battles in Roman history, it's a big deal. Make no mistake. At the same time, it's unremarkable in the sense that it's so common. It's, as we have seen, a prince of the Franks, Ricomeres. He fights at Adrianople. Then he becomes consul a few years later, and we have Bauto, which was a Frankish prince. He becomes a general. His son is Arbogastes, probably, and the daughter will become a Roman Augusta, and Elia Eudoxia, which will rule
Oh.
Constantinople for 4 years, basically. She will be the real ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Um, so, so in that sense, his story looks remarkable to us because it's a Iberian prince that went to fight for the Romans and fought into of the most significant battles there are. But in that sense, is not as remarkable. It's something that happens.
Yeah, but like for me, for someone who's like, because you were like, you mentioned to me, Roberto, do you know Bacurius, the Iberian? I'm like, who is that? And I was looking him up. I'm like, this is fantastic. I didn't know about this because I haven't gotten to it yet. And I was just like, oh my god, I can't wait to cover this guy. And I was like, Marco mentioned him. He is writing he's writing a book about this, and I want to talk to him about Bakur because he's doing the Storia d'Italia. Of course, he knows his Roman history, and I think it's just great because I'm personally like amazed because it's one of the few people we know about that's not part of the royal family. Well, okay, he is, but he's someone who's like not a direct king.
He's not a king, so I can see how that in that sense is a complete. It's really interesting, and think how incredible it is to have the history of a secondary character like this. We can track, even with all the gaps and the holes and the uncertainties, we can still track the history of a guy through the years, through 20 plus years. And we know several sources that talk about him. It's not just one. You have Rufinus, you have Ammianus Marcellinus, you have Zosimus, you have also others. So it's very interesting in that sense.
Yeah, and I think it's just really cool because it's like he's also the person who basically gave us the story of how Georgia converted, which I think makes him very important because without him, we wouldn't have that.
Again, that's mind blowing. No, that's really mind blowing, and it really tells you how much we're talking about one civilization here with different but we're talking about this Mediterranean classical civilization, which in a way it's an entire world that everybody can live in, and they can be a Georgian prince and die in Italy, and have fought in Palestine and in the Balkans. Think how far away this. I mean, our world is immeasurably bigger than antiquity, but think is like today to compare it. Is like today saying, "Oh, there's Iranian that went to fight for the French, and then was an important person in Brazil, and then ended up dying in America." So, in comparison, it's a big lives could actually span almost the entire known world at the time.
Alrighty, so I think that's where we're gonna end it about Bakur. So Marco, where can people find you if they want to know more or talk to you about anything?
Yeah, so of course my podcast Storia d'Italia, it's everywhere. I also have an account called Italia Storia, so written like Italia in Italian and Storia. And I have a website, and I have social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Every day I try to post one thing related to the time I'm covering, and I usually go everywhere. So and you can easily click translate on the social media. So this is also for non-Italian speakers. You have and I make posts about that because I'm curious. So I've made many posts about Georgia, by the way, and Lazican wars. I covered in detail. I talked about Petra, the ruins of Petra. You will talk about it quite a bit in
I can imagine.
in a few episodes. Is a big deal in the Lyzican wars and other things like that. But of course, I talk, and I also wrote a book. If someone reads it, can read in Italian. It's called Per un pugno di barbari, for a fistful of barbarians. So, of course, with an eye on spaghetti western there. So, for a fistful of dollars, for a fistful of barbarians, which tells the history of the 3rd century crisis. So, from the beginning of the crisis to Diocletian included. And I had a lot of fun to cover all the I love complicated pieces of history, so that are difficult or they're very dark, so the 3rd century was fantastic in that sense. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I'm writing a book now on the Goths, actually. So it will be the history of the Visigoths, so that this was very fresh in the memory, because I'm doing the research right now. And finally, I've made the podcast on Storytel. So if you're on Storytel, and it's called Guerre Incivili, Uncivil Wars. And this talks about the social war, at least the first season. Then I should make more season in the future, hopefully. And it talks about the social war, 1st century before Christ.
Oh, that's awesome. And that's the one with, which one is that? That is...
It's before Marius and Sylla.
That's what I was thinking about, Marius and Sylla. So...
Yeah, sulla, of course, in English and Latin. In Italian, it's Sylla. I don't know why we changed it, but in English, you kept the correct version, which is sulla. So and it's a very interesting piece of history, because it's really when the Roman Republic starts spinning out of control. I think up until the social war, whatever problems they had could have been potentially solved. After the social war is like it's like one ticket without return towards autocracy.
Yeah, I totally get it. Well, thank you so much, Marco, and we're so glad to have had you on the show today.
No, thank you, Roberto. It's like fantastic, and I really hope to go back to Georgia. Is really one of my favorite country in the world.
No, it's also one of my favorite ones, and I can't wait to go to Italy and also hang out with you in person.
Exactly.
It's so crazy, because Marco and I were in Houston at the same time, and we
couldn't meet. We couldn't meet
because I was busy working, and I was like, "Oh, let's meet here." Like, I'm doing this, like, I can't come. Actually, I found out last minute, so I was like, "Oh, darn!" And now I'm in Pennsylvania, so it's like, Marco, you better come to New York sometime.
Pennsylvania, I have a brother-in-law there, so I may show up unexpected.
All right, sounds great. So I'm gonna put all the information for Marco's websites, and I'll even try to put his book down there. So if you want to purchase a book in Italian, you can do so. I don't know. I will probably try to get it just to say I have a book in Italian. I can read some Italian. Io sono un ragazzo and all that.
If you know Spanish, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Marco.
Thank you, Roberto.
Welcome to Novabet, the ultimate destination for Euros football betting. All Novabet customers can get a free €5 bet daily, every day throughout the group stages of the Euros. Once they place a €10 bet builder, potentially earning up to €65 in free bets. And all new customers will get a minimum of €50 in free bet when they register with Novabet and stake 10. Don't forget to download the Novabet app for exclusive prices and promotions. Novabet, the home of football for the Euros. T's and C's apply. 18 plus. Bet responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
From dining on board to going off-grid, from chilling out to diving in. Discover a greater way to escape this summer with Brittany Ferries. Sailings from Rosslare to Bilbao. Hurry, book now for 30% off your sailing when you book a Brittany Ferries holiday. Excludes onboard accommodation. See website for details.